Today we are going to conduct the employee training for facilities with underground storage tanks. This state-mandated training must be provided by a licensed designated UST operator that is assigned to your facility. This training must be provided annually for all employees. New employees must receive this training within 30 days of hire. We will cover the following topics today: emergency response including emergency contacts, the site map, fire response, spill documentation, and identifying spill pathways. Hazardous materials and waste including safety data sheets, handling storage hazardous waste, documenting the disposal of hazardous waste, and finally, we will discuss underground storage tanks including leaking USTs, the UST alarm system, UST alarm response, and UST alarm response documentation. Emergency response. Bad things can happen at facilities that store and use hazardous materials. These include fires and spills. We will discuss proper protocols for emergency response. Your facility must have a list of emergency contacts including facility emergency coordinator contacts and the contact information for the fire department, local certified unified program agency or CUPA, the California Office of Emergency Services, and the nearest medical facility.
The emergency contact list is usually posted on site or can be found in the compliance binder. Refer to your site for the exact location. The site map is an important document to be familiar with. It shows the following: the emergency meeting area or the staging area, the location of hazardous waste and materials on site, the location of fire extinguishers, locations of emergency shutoffs, and the location of spill kits. The site map is usually posted on site or can be found in the Search tab in the Compliance Binder. Refer to your site for the exact location.
In the event of a fire, use the emergency shutoff in order to stop the flow of gasoline. For a small fire, use an extinguisher to put out the small fire. Locations of the fire extinguishers are shown on the site map. For a large fire, evacuate all employees to the staging area as per the site map. Evacuate customers, call 911, and contact your facility's management. To operate a fire extinguisher, remember the word pass. Pull the pin, aim the nozzle at the base of the fire, squeeze the handle, and sweep the nozzle from side to side. Remember, fire extinguishers should only be used on small fires or to suppress a fire to allow a person to escape. Large fires should be handled by the fire department. We will now move on to spill control and response. General spill control and response. If safe to do so, facility personnel will take immediate measures to control or stop any release. Refer to your site for the specific locations of the spill kits. Remember to use personal protective equipment or PPEs when responding to a spill. These include gloves, goggles, and safety vests. PPE should be located with the spill kits. In the event of a spill, shut down turbine or dispensers with emergency shut-off switch or the main electrical panel if fuel is still being released. Call 911 if the spill is serious. Restrict access to the spill area with barricades and caution tape if required. If safe to do so, prevent spills from entering storm drains or from leaving the property. Once again, make sure you use appropriate PPEs. Dispose of used spill kit supplies as hazardous waste, never in the trash or dumpster. Document any response activity in the spill log. Contact the facility emergency coordinators as listed on the emergency contact list. It is important to know where the emergency fuel shutoff is located in case of an emergency. Refer to your site for the location. Other shutoff locations for gas, water, and electrical service can be found on the facility's site map. All significant spills must be recorded. A recordable release is any unauthorized release that requires the use of a spill kit to clean. These spills must be recorded in the spill log. In addition, a spill must be reported to your local CUPA if it is greater than 5 gallons. A 911 reportable spill is any spill greater than 5 gallons that significantly endangers life, health, property, or the environment. In the event of a spill such as this, you must call 911, the local CUPA, and the Office of Emergency Services. In the spill log, note the following: the date of the incident, the source of discharge, the approximate volume of the spill, the date of the response to the spill, the method of contact, and any agencies that were contacted. Agency contact numbers are included on the spill log. The spill log also has reporting contacts for spills. The spill log for your site should be in the compliance binder. Please check with your facility if you are unsure on the specific location. Material spilled within the property can enter the navigable waters via public storm water drainage systems. This can result in big fines and big cleanup costs. Fortunately, we already know where spills usually happen and the routes they will take. Spills start at locations where materials are transferred from one container to another, such as fuel dispensers and at tank fills. Spills also follow slopes and curbs. It is important to identify likely spill pathways before a spill happens. This will improve your ability to respond to a spill. Spill kit equipment should be deployed at likely spill pathways. Place spill kit equipment in areas that will prevent the spill from leaving the property. We will now move on to proper handling, storage, and transport of hazardous materials and waste. This picture is a perfect example of how not to store your hazardous waste. Obvious mistakes include improper storage, non-labeling, and unacceptable drum conditions. We will talk about proper handling of hazardous waste in later slides. Your facility may utilize numerous hazardous materials as part of normal operations or for infrequent activities like maintenance and cleaning. These might include fuels, lubricants, processed feedstocks, material conditioners, solvents and cleaning agents, as well as compressed gases. Your employer must provide safety data sheets for all hazardous materials you may be exposed to while at work. SDS may be provided in printed or electronic formats. Check with your facility for the exact safety data sheet's location. SDSs, formerly known as MSDSs, have been standardized to include the following information in the following order for hazardous materials: identification in Section 1, hazard identification in Section 2, composition and information on ingredients in Section 3, first aid measures includes important symptoms and effects, acute, delayed, and required treatment in Section 4, firefighting measures in Section 5, accidental release measures in Section 6, and handling and storage in Section 7. In continuance, exposure controls and personal protection in Section 8, physical and chemical properties in Section 9, stability and reactivity in Section 10, toxicological information in Section 11, ecological information in Section 12, disposal considerations in Section 13, transport information in Section 14, regulatory information in Section 15, and finally other information in Section 16. To help workers locate important hazardous materials handling information, the new Hazardous Materials Communication Standards requires labels on each container that provides the critical information from the safety data sheets. Hazardous chemical classes and phases. Chemicals can be toxic, reactive, ignitable, and corrosive. Chemicals forms include solids, liquids, and gases. Variations of these forms can be dust, mist, fumes, and vapors. Exposure to hazardous materials can cause two kinds of health effects. Chronic effects are an adverse effect on an animal or human body with symptoms that develop slowly due to long and continuous exposures to low concentrations of a hazardous substance. Such symptoms do not usually subside when the exposure stops. Acute effects are an adverse effect due to the exposure to a harmful substance on animals or humans, whereby severe symptoms develop rapidly and lead quickly to a health crisis. These symptoms often subside when the exposure stops. Chronic effects include cancer, birth defects, and damage to major organ systems. Acute effects include respiratory distress,
skin and eye burning, irritation, permanent burns, blindness, GI irritation, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and inhalation of liquid, usually from aspiration of vomit.
Hazardous materials cannot have an effect unless there is an exposure. All exposures have a route. They can be ingestion, inhalation, skin contact, eye contact, or injection. To prevent exposures, PPEs are worn to intercept hazardous materials and prevent exposure. Examples of PPEs include dust mask, full-face respirators, gloves, face shields, and safety glasses. Another important PPE is good housekeeping. Most hazardous materials exposures can be avoided if hazardous wastes are maintained in appropriate containers and only removed from the containers when needed. Never store hazardous materials in locations where food is kept. Never use a food or drink container to store hazardous materials, even temporarily. Finally, the best exposure prevention is to approach hazardous materials handling and storage thoughtfully. Think about the potential hazards posed by any hazardous materials you are using and think about how you can prevent exposure to yourself, your coworkers, and the environment. Ask yourself, what are you handling? What kind of hazards it presents? How you or coworkers could be exposed? How something could go wrong? And what you need to do to prevent an exposure. If an acute exposure does occur, the recommended first aid is usually to move a victim of an inhalation exposure to a well-ventilated area and provide oxygen as required, to wash the skin for 15 to 20 minutes for skin contact exposure with non-abrasive soap, to flush the eye for 15 to 20 minutes for eye contact, and for ingestion, never induce vomiting. Instead, seek medical attention. Hazardous waste. Hazardous wastes are a special category of hazardous materials. For something to be a hazardous waste, it must be a waste. Then, it must be considered hazardous. There are many classifications for hazardous waste that we will not get into for this training session. If you have additional questions about the classification of hazardous waste, contact a Rely Environmental Compliance Associate. Common hazardous wastes at facilities like this one include contaminated fuels, solvents or feedstock, used fuel filters, used oil, sump water, used antifreeze, used transmission fluid, used spill kit supplies, and clarifier and tank bottom sludges. Refer to your site for the specific hazardous waste storage location. All hazardous waste containers must be labeled with the following information: the start date, the words hazardous waste, information about the generator, information about what the waste is, if the waste is a solid, liquid, or a gas, and if it's toxic, reactive, ignitable, or corrosive, also known as TRIC. Note that the start date is the first date that any waste was put into the container. Hazardous waste must be stored appropriately. Storage standards include closed containers that are in good condition, flammable containers must be grounded, containers must be removed as required depending on generator category. You must inspect your hazardous waste storage area or areas weekly. Hazardous waste can only be removed from your facility by a licensed hazardous waste hauler. When hazardous waste are disposed of, manifests are used to track hazardous waste from cradle to grave. After the waste is cataloged, it is signed off for shipment by the generator. Any hauler that transports the waste must also sign for taking possession of the waste. Finally, the treatment site or disposal facility must sign off when it receives the waste for treatment or disposal. Hazardous waste generators are responsible for making an additional copy of the manifest and sending it to the Department of Toxic Substances Control at the following address: DTSC, Department of Toxic Substances Control, P.O. Box 400, Sacramento, California, 95812. In addition, the generator should receive a copy of the hazardous waste manifest from the treatment site or disposal facility within 30 days of having the waste removed from the site. If you do not receive this copy, make sure you notify your Rely Environmental Compliance Associate.
We can assist you in obtaining a copy of the manifest or filing a manifest exception report with the Department of Toxic Substances Control. Underground Storage Tanks, or USTs. In this section, we will look at the environmental risk presented by USTs. We will cover the following: how USTs are built and monitored to reduce environmental risk, how to respond to UST system alarms, and how to properly document those alarms. Underground storage tanks can leak hazardous materials into the ground. This contaminates the soil and water around the tank. Key highly toxic contaminants are benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, collectively called BTEX. Furthermore, these contaminants move with the water table and contaminate groundwater far from the initial leak source. Nationwide, there have been over 500 confirmed leaking tank systems. This is nearly a third of all installed systems. And while over 400,000 of these releases have been remediated, there are still over 70,000 remaining cleanups. Modern underground storage tanks have secondary containment for all components. Secondary containment is designed to catch hazardous materials in the event of a breach of the primary component walls. This diagram shows where secondary containment is typically installed in an underground storage tank system. It is important to note that secondary containment is not intended for long-term material storage. Release of hazardous material into secondary containment is an emergency situation that requires prompt action. All secondary containment spaces are monitored electronically with sensors that go into an alarm if they detect liquid. All sensors are connected to the alarm console, which displays a visual and audible alarm when a sensor is activated. It is important for you to know where the underground storage tank alarm console is located. There are different types of consoles. Refer to your site for the console location and type. Check it daily to ensure that it is working and to check if there is an active alarm. Make sure that there are no warning or alarm lights flashing and record the results in the alarm log. The alarm log is to be completed daily. Refer to your site for the exact location of the alarm log. If any liquid is discovered in a secondary containment space, it must be removed within 24 hours. Never tamper with sensors. It is a serious violation that could result in a fine of up to $5,000 per sensor per day. Documentation of alarm response is mandatory. If the system goes into a fuel alarm, use the emergency contact list to notify someone who is authorized to take action in response to an alarm. If an alarm shows that there is liquid in one of the secondary containment spaces, you can either contact a service provider and maintain the receipt, or you can remove it yourself. Make sure to use an intrinsically safe pump to prevent a fire or explosion. Handle waste removed from sumps as hazardous waste. If you suspect the liquid is fuel, contact the service provider to remove the fuel and diagnose any leak. And make sure to document the alarm response. Your system may go into other types of alarms, including a sensor not functioning, line leak alarms, or high product and overfill alarms. Use the emergency contact list to notify a designated responsible person. For alarms that require a response, complete the alarm response form. These steps include documenting a description of the alarm, making and attaching an alarm record tape to the alarm response document, listing responses to the alarm, how the alarm was resolved, and attaching any work orders generated as part of the alarm response to the alarm response document. Blank copies of this form are in the UST compliance binder. Finally, there is the Underground Storage Tank Compliance Binder. It contains all the legally required compliance documents for the underground storage tank system. This includes permits, monthly designated operator reports, the monitoring and response plan, a detailed emergency response plan, the site plan, alarm response documentation, safety data sheets, formerly known as MSDSs, and records for the training you are completing today. Check with your facility and know the location of the compliance binder. We hope you never need much of the information included in this training, but now you are prepared to handle emergencies at this facility because you now know the location of the emergency contact roster and site plan, what to do in the event of a spill or fire, the location of the spill kit,
how to safely handle and dispose of hazardous materials and waste, and how the underground storage tank alarm system works, and how to respond to an alarm. Thank you for participating in this important environmental health and safety training session.
If you have any questions about this training, contact us at info@relienvironmental.com.